The following is a production of the Dallas Genealogical Society. For more information, please visit our website at www.dallasgenealogy.org.
Better.
All right, perfect.
No.
No?
Right there. No, right there. That's perfect, right there.
All right, everybody keep your fingers crossed that everything keeps working. So, welcome again. This is Thursday, December 4th, and it's the Technology Special Interest Group of the Dallas Genealogical Society. And we are in the middle of kind of our 2014-2015 schedule and talking tonight about storage methodologies. And this is going to wrap up our discussion about archiving, which we started back in October. And you can see the other presentations we have coming up later this year. I'm going to pick up where I had left off on October 2nd. And back then we had talked about the importance of having a good directory structure, using descriptive file names, and using lots of metadata. And if you missed that presentation, it is available on the website. I'm recording all the presentations this year and trying to get them up there just as quickly as I can using our new YouTube channel. So if you did happen to miss the October presentation, want to go back and get caught up on it, feel free to jump over there and do that. It's in two parts. I have to break it up a bit in order to get the files uploaded because of the length of them, but it is all there. So tonight, Archiving 2, and what we're going to be talking about are some file formats that you ought to consider using when you're creating files and storing them, and then some methodologies for storing your files, kind of building on what we talked about a few months ago when we were talking about backups, but much more extensive. So let's just jump right in. So tonight we're going to talk about using preservation file formats, and then some of the principles of archiving, making many copies, storing them in multiple locations, using something called archival media, and then the very important maintenance and migration, because unfortunately you're going to find that once you do all this work to get all your metadata and all your stuff done, you got to go back and maintain it. It isn't just kind of a fire and a forget kind of a thing. You need to go back and do some maintenance on these files to make sure that they're going to continue to be usable into the future. That's a very important aspect of archiving. So let's talk a bit about preservation file formats. If you're creating files, you might as well create them in a format that is likely to stand the test of time, so to speak. And so the file formats that you ought to think about using for files you really care about should be standards-based and widely supported. And the reason for that is you want to make sure if you're going through all the trouble of creating things that you have formats that are supported and are likely to be around for a long time. And so it's best to avoid proprietary and vendor-specific stuff if you have an opportunity to. And you want to select a file type that's appropriate for the type of digital file that you're creating. And we're going to be talking about two types of files tonight, and one is images, things that you would create with a scanner or with a digital camera, or that you might download from a website or something that's already in a digital format. And something that's little understood, and that is that there are actually some archival formats for documents, things that you may create with a word processor, PowerPoint presentations, spreadsheets, and things like that. I mean, those are all tools that we can and frequently do use in our genealogy. And if you have things that are relevant that you want to preserve, it's appropriate to think about using some of these preservation file formats. So let's talk first of all about images. And when you have images that you really care about, family heirlooms and things like that, what you're looking for in a file format is something that is a lossless file format. And all that simply means is that there is no loss in the quality of the image when you save it and when you go back and view it again. So that you want to make sure that all of the pixels that you captured when you were digitizing that image are going to be there every time you go and look at that file. And so you've probably heard of the TIFF file format, tag image file format. That's kind of the granddaddy of the image lossless formats, and the one that is widely used throughout the world. Now there's also a new kid on the block, something called JPEG 2000, which is very different than the old JPEG. It's a little bit confusing, but it's an extension and an enhancement of the original JPEG protocol. And so and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So those are basically your two choices when it comes to looking for a file format that you can use to ensure that your images are going to have all of the fidelity and all of the quality every time you go in and look at them. Now the downside to using these lossless file formats is that typically they're much larger. One of the reasons that some of the other file formats are so popular is because they do compress the file and make it very, much smaller and easier to email and use on social media. But they do that at the expense of the quality of the image. So TIFF and JPEG 2000, although they create bigger files, are very important to use if you're creating images of things that you really care for. So for example, if you're scanning pictures or scanning documents or something, you would always want to scan those into a TIFF file format. But if you do want to use them on your website, or you want to send them on email or on social media, then what you can do is you can make what's called a derivative image of that. So go ahead and create your image using a TIFF or a JPEG 2000 format. Why am I going backwards? We don't want to go backwards. There we go. And then from that TIFF image, for example, you can go in using Photoshop or other software tools, and you can make a JPEG or a PNG or another lossy compressed file format that you can then send to relatives for Christmas, or birthday pictures, or whatever you want to do. But always make sure that the image that you create is first created in, stored at, and saved as a TIFF or a JPEG 2000, and then make copies of it and work with those copies if you want some smaller formats. So what's the trouble with JPEG? JPEG is a very widely used protocol. The problem with it is that it creates a permanent loss in the quality of the image. That's where the compression comes in. Every time you open a JPEG file, modify it in some way, and save it, you have to save it to lose the quality, it kind of recalculates the compression and throws away some more of the bits. And so every time you edit a JPEG file, you're actually decreasing the quality of that image more and more. And if you ever take a JPEG image and you zoom it up in quite large, you'll see the pixelations that are occurring, because what the protocol does is it just says, I'm going to look at a group of dots. Let's imagine you've taken a nice picture of a blue sky. What the protocol does is it says, well, there's an awful lot of blue dots around there. We don't really need all of them. We'll just save some of them as kind of representative, and we'll use those to fill in around there. And that's how it achieves this really, really good compression. But it does that every time you save the file, and eventually you're going to get a pretty pixelated, pretty chunky looking image. So that is the problem with JPEG, and why it is not a good thing to use if you're trying to work with images that you really care about. Now, unfortunately, many times JPEG is the only file format that you have. You may get it from a camera, or perhaps you've gotten the image from somebody else in a JPEG format. What do? Well, it's as good as it's going to get, but you can minimize the damage by doing a couple of things. One way is just to never save that file, because you only do the recalculation when you write over the same file again. So one technique is to just save that file as it is, make a copy of it, and if you want to do things to it, crop it or try to enhance it or something, work with the copy, but always leave that master image alone. You can take a JPEG image and convert it into a lossless format like a TIFF. Now, it will not undo the damage. The bits that were thrown away when the original JPEG was created are gone forever. You can't reverse that. But you can at least save it for example, as a TIFF format, and then at least you'll never have that degradation occurring with that TIFF file again. So, just a good thing to know that JPEG has its place, but saving preservation quality images is not one of them. Now, if you have a more upscale, SLR type camera like a Canon or something like that, you may have some choices. Smaller cameras, these little portable things or phones, JPEG may be the only choice, but on a more expensive or a more professional quality type camera, you do have the ability to save these images in something that's referred to as a RAW format. And what that is, it's a specific format. Canon has theirs, each manufacturer has their own RAW format, and you have to have software that is capable of reading it and working with it. But if you have that combination, a camera that can create a RAW image and software to work with it, then it's possible to do some interesting things. And so, for example, this is just a screenshot I took where I had taken a picture I'd taken in my study just to prove that it would work in the RAW format, and I'm reading it in Adobe Photoshop Elements. So that proved to me that I could get the RAW format out of my camera into the software, and then from there I could do a file and a save as, and save this as a TIFF, or save it as a JPEG, or save it as whatever format that I want. But this RAW format is a bit like TIFF in the sense that all of the data is there, all of the pixels, all of the color information, everything that the camera can possibly record is in this file. And so this is the most robust version of the file that I can possibly work with. And for, again, if I'm taking pictures of documents, or if I'm taking pictures of historically significant photographs or paintings or things like that, I would be tempted then to save it as a raw format so that I have the highest amount of resolution I can possibly get out of this camera. So just some things to think about if you're using your camera as a digitization tool. If you're scanning stuff, there's always the question of how much resolution do I need? When do I have enough resolution? When do I have too much? And unfortunately, like most things technical, it just kind of depends. It depends on the quality of the image that you are scanning and the size of it. So if you have, unfortunately, the more resolution that you have, the larger the files that are created are going to be. And so just kind of as a general guideline, if you have a high quality image or a smaller image, you're probably going to want to scan at a higher resolution, more pixels per inch. If you have a lower quality image, like perhaps something out of a newspaper, it may not justify a real high resolution setting on your scanner because it's just basically pixels itself. So lower quality images and very large images, as a rule, you can scan at a lower resolution and get away with it. Now that's pretty general. It doesn't really help you with the specifics, I know. But there is a good website, the University of North Texas portal to Texas history, which is a website dedicated to a lot of images related to Texas history. It also has some really good references for people who are scanning documents. And this URL right here will take you to a page that has kind of document type by document type directions for how to set your scanner if you are scanning things. And I picked, because it was kind of illustrated photographs, negatives and slides. The thing about negatives and slides is they have an incredible amount of detail, and particularly if you have a negative, it's very, very small. And so as you'll see, what they're talking about, if you're working with color negatives and slides, they recommend scanning at 5,000 pixels across the longest side. So a slide is about 1 inch across, so that'll be about 5,000 dots per inch. And a negative and a slide will justify that because, again, it has very, very good resolution on it. It has to, because it does get enlarged and shown on screens like this. And when you scan it at that real high resolution, there is enough detail in it that it makes it worthwhile for a negative. Now 5,000 dots per inch, again, for something like out of a newspaper would just be way overkill, because when you blow a newspaper up and look at it in detail, you see it's just a bunch of dots on the page, and 5,000 dots per inch would be overkill. But the point is that this website has information like this for just about anything that you're likely to be wanting to scan and digitize, and you can go here and kind of get some suggestions from them as to how to set up your scanner and what is appropriate for that type of a document. So a really good resource to keep in mind. Okay, so that kind of does it for the file formats for images. Those are kind of straightforward. Let's talk a little bit about documents, which was something that's kind of a surprise to me when I was researching this, because I did not realize that this capability existed. You've all probably heard of PDF documents. Okay, so a PDF is just a way of taking a document from a proprietary format like Microsoft, for example. They have Word and they have spreadsheets and things like that. Well, those are all proprietary to Microsoft, and if you don't have their particular piece of software, you can't view the document. The idea behind PDF was that Adobe creates some software that will interpret it and take it out of that specific format from Microsoft and put it into Adobe's generic published format, and that way anybody can view the document that has the Adobe viewer. They make it freely available to anybody. So that's something we know and love, and this has been around for many years. Well, it turns out that the folks at Adobe wanted to expand this and move into the archiving world. And so they came up with something known as PDF/A, and that stands for the Portable Document Format for Archiving. And this actually is an ISO standard. They worked with the international community to get this moved and created as a standard. And so it is one that is something that can and should be used by people who are concerned about preserving documents that we are creating and want to make sure are viewable for the future. There's a really good article out on the Family Search website, Preserving Your Family History Records Digitally by Gary T. Wright, and he described it perfectly, so I'm just going to quote from him what PDF-A really is. He said, it provides a self-contained, self-describing format that is independent of external sources. It embeds relevant fonts and color information with the content data so that future computer software will be able to render the document exactly as it can be rendered today. So it's kind of a super PDF, well, it's an extension of the PDF, but they basically take the content and the things that are necessary to display it as it was created in the original format in this kind of portable, international standard supported format. So you can think of taking a normal file from any proprietary vendor you can think of, where let's just take a Word document. If you're bolding something or underlining it or italicizing or using different fonts and things, to use Microsoft as an example, they're going to have their own proprietary formatting stuff in the file. And you're going to have their software if you want to view that file. The problem with that is that you're kind of at their mercy. If they upgrade their software and they do that several times, you're going to reach a point at which your old document may no longer be viewable by that software. Or the other way, somebody may give you a document that's created with a newer version of Word than you have, and your version of Word can't view it because you didn't buy it from Microsoft. So that's the problem with using proprietary type stuff. It's very powerful, very good as long as you're current, but if you get a little out of sync, then you start having problems viewing the files. And you can imagine this problem getting magnified over time, 50 years, 100 years from now. Something you've created today might present a lot of problems for people in the future. They may not be able to read it. So this is where the PDFA format comes in. They take your content data and all of the formatting stuff from whatever proprietary software vendor you're working with, like Microsoft, and they embed some stuff and put it in the file with the data. And the protocol allows them to say, okay, with the fonts and the information about the colors and the information about the page layout and all the formatting information, we, the PDFA people with this ISO standard, now have enough information that we can recreate this document. We don't need Microsoft anymore, or we don't need whoever it is that made the original file. So by bundling in with the document all of the fonts and the colors and the page information, it makes this now much more likely that this document is going to be viewable for a long time, which is a good thing when you're trying to archive stuff. After all, the whole idea of archiving is to preserve stuff for quite a while. Yes, Caroline, a question?
A question on the PDFA. If I create a document in PDFA, is it still able to be opened, like, for example, by someone else who just has Adobe Viewer?
In the PDFA format, yes, that's correct. And I've got a couple more slides in this that may.
Sorry.
No. Feel free to ask all that you want. I think I can. Okay, all right. So there are a couple of different kinds of PDFA files. There's the 1B, and you can think of B as standing for basic. And what this does is just basically make sure that you will be able to reproduce the visual appearance of the document. So in a sense, it's kind of like taking a snapshot of the document as it appeared. There's a slightly enhanced protocol, and that's the 1A. And with this, not only will it reproduce the document so it looks the same, but it also makes the content available so it can be repurposed and searched. So it's a little more of an advanced way, and it's making the data available and hopefully in a format that you could like copy and paste and do things with. So the 1A is a little more advanced and something that you would strive for if you have a document you're trying to convert into a PDF format. So the nice thing about saving something as a PDFA document is that it's going to increase the chances that this file is going to be viewable by people far into the future. That's really the goal with archiving. A couple of drawbacks. Forget security. Security doesn't exist in a world where you're trying to make something available for future generations. So the whole idea of putting something in a PDFA format is that you want to make it as easy as possible for people to view it in the future. So this isn't for things that you really want to hold close and not publish with somebody else. And because you have a company like Adobe working with a wide range of software manufacturers trying to figure out every little trick that they have for rendering their documents, some of the bells and whistles and features may not translate quite literally. This is especially true if you have things that have Java functionality embedded into them. This would be more true like in a PowerPoint setting or presentations and things. So sometimes what Adobe thinks the document should look like may be a little different than the original. So it does its best, but there are just going to be times when you're going to look at what PDF did to it and say, well, that isn't how it looked over here. And that's just because that it can't do everything perfectly with every possible combination of stuff out there. And it is a little bit, I'll say complicated. So it's just important to understand what PDFA really is and some of the limitations and how it should be used and how it can be used to make sure that you're using it most effectively. So, but it still is a pretty good standard and about the best way that I have found for preserving, like for example, this PowerPoint presentation. I can, as I'll show you, I have the ability to save this whole thing in a PDF-A file format, which if it was something that was really historically significant, not this, but if it was, that might be something that I want to do and make sure that it is available for future generations. So how do you create a PDF-A file? Well, if you're a Mac user, you're going to have to use some third-party software. Adobe Acrobat Pro or some similar software package is necessary for you, at least as far as I can tell, and I'm not a real powerful Mac user, but from what I can read, you're going to have something like this for you to convert an existing file into a PDF-A format. Now, Mac does have something called PDFX, which is a similar attempt, but it's focused on graphics and printing. And so if you save something as a PDFX format, its intention is to try to make sure that you will be able to print that or view it on a monitor well into the future. A slightly different slant than what the PDF-A is all about. Windows users have it a little bit easier if you're using the Microsoft Office suite of software, because from within there, most of the packages have the ability to create a PDF-A right from the document. Now, you don't use the Save as Adobe PDF as you might think, because that would just create the plain vanilla PDF document that I was talking about earlier. To get to the PDF-A, you have to do a Save As and go down and select Options. And then down at the bottom of there, you want to check this box that says ISO 19005-1 compliant and then parentheses PDF-A. And so if you go through all of that and then click OK, it will create a separate document in the PDF-A format for you. Now, Microsoft being Microsoft, it's a good idea to make sure they're doing it right. And Adobe gives you the ability to check the PDF-A document and make sure that it complies with their standards. And you can do this in Acrobat X. And what you do is you open the file up and you go down over on the side there is a Verify Conformance button you can click. And you'll see right now in this view it's saying not verified. Well, if you click on that and everything goes well, you'll get a verification succeeded. And that's your indication that, at least as far as Adobe can tell, the document looks like it is formatted in this PDF-A format correctly. If you have problems, it will instead give you a list of some of the things that it found in the document that it couldn't understand, and you'll have to go back and try to resolve those things. But if you're not doing anything too fancy in your document, if it's just, in this case, it was just a Word document, it just should roll on out and work quite well. But all of the Microsoft Office products have this ability, and so you should be able to save things in a PDF-A format if you choose to. Now, Barbara, kind of touching, or not Barbara, Carolyn, kind of touching on your point earlier. I'm going to get that because actually it's not the slide. We'll get to that in just a minute. Unfortunately, one bad thing about the standard is that both PDF files and PDF-A files have the same extension. They're both PDF.
That's going to be one of my questions.
And so there's no way from just looking at the file name of telling, what is this? Fortunately, again, Adobe's kind of helping us out a little bit because their software will tell you. So if you open a document in just about any Adobe software package and it is a PDF-A document, you'll get this blue banner across here, which is a little hard to read, so I've typed it down there. It just says this file claims compliance with the PDF-A standard and has been opened read-only to prevent modifications. And so that's Adobe speak for saying, this is a PDF-A document, you can read it, but if you're going to change it, all bets are off. Now you can change it. You can go up here and click this Enable Editing button, and you'll get a dialog box that's basically saying, danger, 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 you're about to change this document. If you do, you better check it again and make sure that it's compliant. So PDF-A I kind of think of as kind of a one-way street. Something that you create from the original file and then make a copy of as a PDF-A type document. And it's important that you keep the original file. So if I'm working, again, let's just say in a Microsoft Office format that I'm doing all this, word processing and formatting, once I create this PDF-A document, I want to keep the original because if I ever want to make a change to the document, I'm going to go back and do it in Microsoft Word. And when I'm done with those changes, I'll make another copy and save it again as a PDF-A type archived document. So you don't want to make the mistake of kicking it over in a PDF-A format and throwing away your original. Not a good idea. There's a really good video I found. It's about an older version, but it's working with the PDF-A in Acrobat 9. And I would encourage you to take, if you're thinking about doing some of this, to spend 15 minutes, because this will do a far better job than I've been able to kind of explain more about the PDF-A format and how it's used and how you can do some things with it. So that link down there is just, will take you right to it, and it's a real good introduction to the topic. Okay, so now that we've got all these files, what do we do with them? Well, we want to make sure that we don't have a real bad day, so we're going to be talking about some things that you can and you should do to make sure that you always have at least one version of your files available to you. And so the first premise that you want to think about is making sure that you have many copies of your files. And so one way to help ensure this is just simply, as we talked about a couple of months ago, schedule backups. If you have a Windows machine or you have a Macintosh, they have wonderful built-in tools that will let you schedule backups anytime that is convenient for you, and will allow you to make sure that you have made a good backup of all the files that you're working with in your PC. So that's kind of step one, is to make sure that you have your backups enabled and that they're working, and writing them someplace where they're going to be preserved. If you can, it's a good idea to write your backups on something other than the disk that you work on every day, because that way if you have a head crash and that disk dies or something, you have your backups someplace else. If you're writing your backups on the disk you're working on all the time and it crashes, you better hope you have them someplace else. So that's one thing that you can do to make sure that you've got copies of your files. In addition, it's a good idea to make additional copies of your files, either copies of that backup that you're creating or just copies of the files as you're working with them. All of your pictures or all of your census records, what have you. That's where the organization comes in. If you recall, we talked about having a good directory structure where you have all your genealogy files in one location and have your files in a logical, sensible way. This makes it much easier for you to say, okay, well, I want to back up those pictures. I want to back up all of the family history files, and I'm going to put them on a USB drive or a network access server or some other place, and have the ability to logically and consistently create additional copies of your files. There's an old saying in archiving, it's Loxis. Lots of copies keeps stuff safe. So the idea is that you want to have multiple copies of your things, so that if your PC has a catastrophic failure or something like that, you have copies safely stored someplace else to recover from. And kind of expanding on that then, you want to make sure that you have copies in multiple locations. Having all of your copies in your office, when your house burns down, isn't really helpful. You want to make sure that you've got copies of your files in some other location, so if something really bad happens at home, you've got them someplace else. And so in this archiving scheme, you want to make sure that you have at least one off-site location that you're using for storing your files. And you can do this a number of ways. You can give copies to a relative or friend. I know genealogists that exchange disks every now and then. You can make a copy and put it in your safe deposit box. You can use some kind of a backup service or cloud storage. Any of these ways are effective ways to get copies of your files someplace other than in your house. So that's a really important thing to do. You can also use some type of an internet backup service. Now these are typically for a fee type of thing, but Backblaze and Carbonite and Mosey Home, for about $60 a year, they will set up a deal where you can actually back up your files on your PC, store it on their server, and do it automatically, so that every time you make a change to the file, it will sense that it's changed and make a copy for you. So, for a relatively small investment, you can do something like that. There are also cloud storage services. Some are fee-based, some are free, but things like Dropbox, Google Drive, those are both free for certain amounts of data. Amazon S3 is another one that's a little more complicated to use, and also a fee-based service. But those are all examples of cloud-based storage services that you can use to make copies of your files someplace other than your house. So however you choose to do it, as we talked about when we talked about the backup stuff a few months ago, you kind of got three things you can spend here, time, money, or risk, I guess. You can risk losing the files. But pick something that works for you and works for the amount of data that you have and for the amount of changes that your data is going through, and get some files someplace off-site. If you are storing physical disks someplace, just a few things to keep in mind. Disks like cool, dry locations. They don't like large temperature fluctuations, so you want to put them someplace where the temperature is real consistent. You want to avoid sunlight. Ultraviolet rays are damaging to media, and also it generates heat, so it's kind of a double whammy there. And use containers that are designed for the disks that you're storing. And don't get cheap and start shoving them in envelopes or shoeboxes or something. Because remember, these are the things you're going to go to when something really, really, really bad is happening. You're going to hope you can read them. So treat these things well, because if you go to use them, chances are you're really going to need them. So just try to keep them in a place where, when you do go to grab them, that they're likely to still be functional and readable for you. And then another thing to think about is using some type of a media that is a true archival quality media. Now, what do I mean by that? Because all media is going to fail eventually. Everything will eventually fail. It's just a question of time. And from an archival perspective, the trick is you want to move the files from that media before it fails. You want to put it someplace else. And so no matter what you're using, it is going to die. It's just a question of time and how lucky you are. So for example, your hard disk, things that most all of our PCs have, typically those things last about 10 years. But I was looking at some specifics from Backblaze, which they have a lot of disks, so they've got a lot of data. And they found that about 24% of them fail within the first 4 years. Half of them are going to die within 6 years. So do you feel lucky? Are you going to be part of the 50% that your drive lasts longer than 6 years? Or are you going to be the unlucky 24% where they die in the first 4 years? Even DVDs have a lifespan. And this was something, again, I found interesting. The read-only ones, the one you can write once, actually have a little longer lifespan than the ones that are rewritable. I guess it just kind of makes sense. Even flash drives, they say, may last up to 10 years. So, again, these are different time spans, but the point being that all of them are going to fail eventually. And so if they contain information that's really important to you, you want to make sure you have other copies, and you want to periodically refresh these things so that, if you're choosing, let's say, for example, flash drives, that's a fine archive strategy. Just make sure that you, every so often, go out and make a new one and copy your files over to that, because you don't want to wait 11 years and go back when you really need it and find, oops, can't read it anymore. So in using archival media, this is something that's got a demonstrated ability to store data for a very long period of time. And the advantage of this is it just lets you go for much longer periods of time before you have to do something with that copy that you have sitting on the shelf there. And in your archival strategy, which again, as you can tell, is kind of backups on steroids. In archival, you're really concerned about stuff lasting a long time. And so it should be part of your strategy that you utilize some kind of an archival quality media in storing your files, just to make sure that you have something that's likely going to last for a long time. Now, for a long time, this was kind of the choice that we as hobbyists had. CDs and DVDs and Blu-rays are based on a plastic disc, and the problem with them is that plastic will deteriorate over time. And so that's what causes a CD or DVD to be unreadable anymore. It's basically the surface that the laser has burned the stuff onto is deteriorated to the point where it can't tell if it's a 1 or a 0. And so what this company, Mitsui, somebody came up with was like, well, heck, gold doesn't deteriorate very quickly, so they've layered these discs literally with 24 karat gold, and we're able to get pretty impressive lifespans out of these things. They say a CD read may last 300 years, which is really pretty nice. DVDs, less so. I couldn't find any stats on Blu-rays. I'm not sure that they actually made this as a Blu-ray, but as I said, this used to be about the best thing that we as hobbyists could use. But there's a new technology out there that is really kind of exciting. And it's something referred to as the M disk. And the M in this case stands for millennial, as in 1,000. What they have done is they have identified a substrate that they can put on this media that's stone-like. It's not stone, but it's just a very, very hard substrate, and it lasts, they say, a very long time. And they believe that these things may actually be readable for up to 1,000 years. I'll let you know in 1,000 years. Now, the cool thing about these is that they look sort of like an ordinary CD and DVD. They're the same format, the same size. And in fact, once created, they can be read in any CD, DVD, or Blu-ray reader. But because of this substrate that they use to get this longevity, it's a very tough thing. You have to have a special writer to create them. So you got to have a stronger laser to burn through that substrate and actually create the disc. But from that point forward, this disc is readable in any CD or DVD or Blu-ray reader that is in use today, which is really a pretty cool thing. Costs are coming down. You can buy, like for example, I have a PC tower kind of a thing, so I can buy one of these internal drives and install it in there and use it. So I can get a DVD reader. I found them as low as $16. Even the Blu-ray ones, which are much higher density, are coming down. I'll show you in a minute. I found one for $35. The media has been kind of expensive and hard to find, but it's coming down as well. You can get it in 25, 50, or 100 gigabyte sizes right now. 200 gigabytes is feasible, but I've not seen any yet. But the cost per gigabytes, right now the 25 gigs are kind of in the sweet spot. They're about 3 cents per gigabyte. 50 and the 100 are kind of neck and neck as far as cost per gig, and I'll show you some prices in a different way here in just a second. Here's a drive I found at Amazon. So this is one that is intended to be mounted internally inside of a personal computer. So you've got to provide power. It's a SATA connected thing. So if you have that type of a computer for $35, you can buy this, slap it in there, and you have a Blu-ray device that works with any Blu-ray that you have right now, but it is capable of creating these M-Disc ones. And I know it because in the specs and on the drive, it's got that M-Disc on there. So if you're shopping around for these things, for a Blu-ray or a DVD device, I would encourage you to, look and try to get one that supports the M-Disc, because, it works just like any other reader and writer. But in the addition, it gives you the option of using this really good media if you want to. This was another one that I found. Now this one's a USB 3.0 interface, so you're paying a bit more for it, $125, because it's an external device. It has its own, well, I don't think it has its own power supply, but it runs off of a USB 3.0 connector, so it should work with a Macintosh or a PC or a laptop or anything like that. So for a little more money, 125 as opposed to 35, you get kind of a standalone device. But again, it works with the same M-Disc and other types of Blu-ray devices as well. Media is starting to come down. This is a bundle of 50 discs of the 25 gigabytes for $37. The 50 gig are a little bit more expensive, but the cost per disc is really starting to drop down. So for these 25 gig ones, they're about 75 cents per disc, which is really starting to get affordable. The 50 gigs are a little bit more expensive per disc, so kind of your choice. I'm leaning towards the 25 gig ones right now because the cost is just a bit lower. But it's interesting, see the $2.76, well, okay, these are I found some 100 gigabyte ones, that's $50 a pop. Now when you look at it, as I was showing you a few slides earlier on a price per gigabyte, it turns out the 50 and the hundreds are kind of neck and actually the 100 gigabytes is actually slightly less expensive for the amount of data that you store. But it's a little hard to choke down spending $50 a disk, I know. So right now I'm using a bunch of 25s. And those prices were all as of yesterday. So just to back up on that again, so the nice thing about these disks is that once you've got your information organized, once you've got all your metadata in there, and you kind of have your stuff organized in a way that you're happy with, that's a good time to take and burn a copy into one of these M disks. And then I've got one in my safe deposit box, so I feel pretty comfortable that if I ever have a really, really bad day, my genealogy is not going to be entirely wiped out. It's going to be as it was a month ago when I last made my copy and saved it. So, a little bit of good security and peace of mind. Barbara.
You mentioned something several slides back about USB 3.0.
Yeah.
So, I think my computer is USB 2.0, I think.
Okay, then you would have to shop around a bit more and find one of these that has the 2.0 interface.
Okay, so they still have.
Yeah. And they also, if you're at all familiar with disk technology, they make cases you can buy them for about $10 where you can slide just about any of these. You can put a hard disk in there, a floppy disk. So it should be fairly easy to find one that supports the 2.0. 3, if your computer supports it, just is a much higher speed, much greater throughput, and for these larger disks, if your computer supports it, would be what I'd recommend that you get. Any other questions about archival stuff? Good questions. Okay, and as I mentioned at the beginning, after you've been through all of this work of doing all this stuff, you think, okay, I'm there. You're not. It is important that you need to continue to do some maintenance and migrate stuff. And I'll illustrate this with, first of all, just kind of with the symbolism of a shark. As I found out, not all sharks, but most sharks have to keep moving to live because they need the flow of the oxygen flowing across their gills in order to get oxygen so they can live. And that's a good analogy for what we as hobbyists have to do, and actually what archivists have to do to keep their data fresh. I don't know if y'all saw Dick Eastman this morning. He had an interesting little tidbit, very timely about archiving, where he was mentioning that NASA has these tapes where they've digitized all these Apollo and rocket flight pictures and have them on these thousands and thousands of these reels of tape. Some pictures that nobody's ever seen after they were originally taken. They don't make drives to read these tapes anymore. Now think about that. Think of what a tremendous bit of history that has been lost just within our lifetime. Now they can make them again, and they're working on getting them, I guess. But it's just for a high-tech, space scientist-led kind of an organization to go from the pinnacle of technology, the Apollo program, down to having tapes on a palette that they can't read anymore. It's a little frightening to think about how quickly technology changes. And that's where the maintenance and the migration aspect of this comes in, that you can't just write this stuff once and forget about it. You got to go back and revisit it now and then and make sure that it's still viable. So let me show you an example of something that might be relevant for you. Back in 1983, the DGS was almost 30 years old by then, and we were putting out a very good quality quarterly newsletter. So this is one from September 1983. Now that was also the time that I started working with computers, and if you were state of the art, this is what you aspired to, the original IBM PC. The green monitor that couldn't display any graphics. You had the dual floppy drives in there. This was as good as it got. And back in 1983, this was $3,000, $3,500 worth of hardware in 1983 dollars. This was cool. So imagine that you had created a document back then and you wanted to save it. Well, this would be what you would save it on, a floppy disk. This was state of the art, 360 kilobytes. Now to put that in perspective, typical typewritten page was about 2 kilobytes per thing. So this would be about 180 typewritten pages worth of data. And then if you had more than that, you'd need another disk. So back in the day, you had a lot of floppy disks. Fortunately, technology didn't stand still. So if you had created this file and put it on there, you would have been faced with some upgrades over the years. So you would have gone to the 3.5-inch disk. This had 4 times more data, had a hard plastic shell case, that little metal sleeve slid out of the way so the media was protected. This was a big step forward. So this was PC-AT era. So that would have been about 1985, 86 when that came about. So, had you been a hitty, geeky technologist like me back then, you'd have copied your files over into that. Then Western Digital came out with a hard drive. This, was, again, a huge step forward. This was the IBM PC XT. And I'll tell you, when I got my first XT, and I worked for Southwestern Bell Telephone at the time, I was in the computer lab, so we got all the new stuff. I could not imagine how you could ever fill up a 10 megabyte hard drive. It just was, what are we going to do with all this stuff? Well, you all know how that went. Several years later, Bernoulli came out with this. The Bernoulli drive was a really interesting one. That was an optical disk, held 20 megabytes of data. It was a great backup device. That was about the size of a notebook, about 8.5 by 11. You could actually put that into the drive, write all your data, take it out, put another one in. So it was really cool technology for its day. So of course we started using that. Later on, Iomega came out with the zip drive. I see some heads nodding here. Many of us had zip drives, made Iomega a lot of money. Very popular thing for a while. So in fact, I've still got a zip drive and some stuff on there. Then, the CD and the DVD and the Blu-ray came along. And so this was really high density, low cost, easy way to archive a lot of stuff. And so, technology just marched relentlessly forward. Now our file's on a Blu-ray, right? Well, no, not quite, because we had these MAM-A ones. If you're really interested in archiving them, you write on that. And if you're like me and you like the latest stuff, now you're writing stuff on NAMDisk, right? So we've got this file that's been migrated over a 30-year history from 1983 into the future, and it's still viable, right? Isn't that wonderful? All these different technologies, look at how much technology has changed. But what about the format of that file? I mean, fortunately, I worked for a standards-based company, and so when we picked stuff, we did things like, we picked the dominant word processor. It was the standard commercial word processor of its day. It was the biggest software company in the country that we used for all of our word processing stuff. And of course, I'm talking about WordStar, right? You all know that. To quote our esteemed governor, oops. No matter what I've done to the media, if I've left that file in that 1983 format, I'm going to have a very difficult time finding anything that understands a WordStar format today. I mean, it can be done. It's still possible to read these things, but it's getting harder and harder every day. And so the message here, this is just kind of a fictional. I didn't really do this, but the point is that it's not enough just to keep the files on the newer media. You've got to keep the formats in something that you can read as well. So that's just two different examples of the maintenance activity of what has to go on if you're concerned about archiving and preserving stuff for the future.
Well, and Tony, we've had two examples recently. We started our Oakland cemetery with a particular proprietary cemetery software, really designed for individuals to use. We started using that. The man died, no longer being supported. We now also have to, is it TMG or not TMG? What's one that's going away? What genealogy software that's going away?
The master genealogist,
Master genealogist going away.
Yes.
And people are having to migrate that.
Good examples. So yeah, it's real. It happens, and something that we need to be concerned about. So the way that you do this is that you need to maintain and upgrade all aspects of your personal computer environment. And so your PC itself, the operating system that it's running, the applications that you use to create files, the file formats themselves, things change over time, and your storage media. These are all things that we have to pay attention to and keep relatively current and up to date to ensure that our files are going to be useful as far into the future as possible. So your PC and your operating system, you want to make sure that whatever version of PC you're using, either Macintosh or Windows or Unix or whatever, you want to obtain and load the patches and the upgrades that are put out by the people that support it on a regular basis, because those keep your system current, protect you against viruses and things like that. And so it's just something that is just a fact of life. If, you want to make sure that you have your PC set up to somehow go out and check for these updates and load them and apply them to your system on a regular basis. Don't stay in unsupported versions. Is there anybody here still running Windows XP? No, that's good. I'm afraid to ask this. How about Vista? Great, I'm glad to see that. So, those are examples of operating systems that you could still be running. I know somebody's actually using Vista. Just not a real good idea, because Microsoft has stopped supporting the stuff. It's very vulnerable to getting hacked and having somebody get in and do malicious things to your data. And sooner or later, these things are just going to be like the dodo bird. You're not going to be able to work with them anymore. So, your PC and your computing environment is your toolkit. This is like wrenches to a mechanic and plumber's tools and all that stuff. At least this is my attempt to give you all permission to go out and upgrade your stuff every now and then. Just say, Tony said so, you got to do it, because without the stuff as genealogists anymore, it's really hard to be very effective. Things have changed a bit. And so it's also a good idea to replace your personal computer periodically. Now, how often you need to replace it just kind of depends on the nature of the beast. Macintoshes tend to be a little more advanced technologically, and tend to have longer lifespans, so that kind of justifies the higher upfront cost. Windows-based PCs, not quite so much so you may need to replace those a little more frequently, but you want to avoid technological obsolescence, and you would like to avoid having age-related failures. You don't want to have your disks crashing on you and other things failing just because this thing's been around for 7 or 8 or 9 years and there's dog dust up in there. So I'll say periodically and leave it at that. When you do replace your PC, then you, of course, want to make sure that all of the data, all the things that we're working with, all the images, all of the documents you've created, comes over onto the new PC as well. You want to get it off from that old one and into the new environment. This is a good time to make sure that all of your programs still work in the new environment and are supported, and that you have all of the bits and pieces necessary for it to work on the new PC. And you want to verify that you can read all of those files. So if you have, for example, a gazillion text files that you've created over the years, you want to make sure that you can at least read them, that they open, and that you can view them in the new environment. And this is also a good time to update or replace older software. So I know it's painful, particularly if you live in the Microsoft world, to replace Office. It's they've got some other choices, but that's always like, do I upgrade or do I just keep running the old stuff? Again, for things that if you're creating files that you want to ensure that you can access, it's just something to factor into the budget when you're thinking about replacing the system, that you may have to replace the Office and the other software as well. When you do that, then it's important to make sure that you go into all those old files, open them in the new software environment, and then save them in the new format. But particularly Microsoft is famous for this. Again, several years ago they went to a completely new way of writing their files. It's an XML-based thing. So, in a case like that, what I generally do is keep all the old files archived someplace, but all the files get opened up and then saved in the new format, and that's what I work with going forward. And so you want to do this at the time that you have the new PC and you have the new software and still have the old system, so that if you have a problem, you've got something to fall back on. But you very quickly want to get the software all migrated over into the new version and saved in the new format, so that you're going to be good now for the next 4 or 5 years. And then every time you upgrade your system and upgrade the software, it's just another day you need to go through that all again. And as I've said, it's just important to open and save the files in the new format, so that you're current with that new version of the software and going forward are good to go. And it's also time to think about migrating if the support for your product ends. So those of you that are on the master genealogist are going to have a hard decision to make here at some point in the future. Do you stay with the dinosaur, or do you take all that stuff and go to something that is better supported and more popular? Maybe today it isn't necessary. I'll argue that at some point in the future it probably will be. And that was just a current example that I could point to. Keep an eye on the standards as well. PDFA was created in 2005, but it's been revised a couple of times. Now, if you're staying current in your Adobe software, you're probably current with these latest updates here, but it's just good to know what's going on with the various file formats. TIFF, I think, is pretty stable. It hasn't been changed in about 14 years, so you're probably okay there. But I would definitely keep an eye on JPEG 2000. This seems to be a very good protocol, and I think is destined to replace TIFF. So, not today. I think TIFF is going to be good for a long time, but just something that I'm keeping an eye on. So for example, right now, I don't think I've got any software that supports JPEG 2000. My scanner certainly doesn't. But I'm thinking that as I start replacing the next generation of scanners, I'm probably going to start seeing JPEG 2000 pop up. And at some point, the shift is going to be on, and people will be going over to that and away from TIFF. So just keep an eye on what's going on in the standards world, so you don't end up falling behind and being left in the dust. As far as your storage media is concerned, again, no matter what you use, it's going to die eventually. And so as your stuff is getting to the point where it's likely that it's going to start failing, it's okay to stay in the same media, whatever you're using, just make a new copy of it. And then you're good for however long that's going to last. And keep doing that, as long as you're comfortable with that particular media. But if you're still doing this on floppy disks, I would argue it's probably time to quit that. Get rid of floppies. If there's a significant advance in capacity, longevity, or price, that's a good point at which you might want to consider changing. And I'd argue that as far as we're concerned, I think we're there with MDisk right now. I think the price of the drives, the price of the media is coming down to the point where most of us can afford it. So it's definitely something that I'm going to have on every one of my PCs, in the near-term future. And I just would encourage you to at least take a look at that and consider using it for yourself, because it seems very promising and very affordable. And that's really kind of the final word on this, is that, hopefully you got the idea by now that this is not a static thing, that it's just something that you've got to kind of go back and revisit periodically and make changes as necessary. But if you take into account all of the things that we've talked about over these two discussions, doing the things with your directory structures, using descriptive file names, putting metadata in there, using preservation file formats, many copies, many locations on Archival Media, and then doing all the maintenance and migration, it's going to have some benefits for a couple of groups of people. You know, by archival, we're of course talking about the future, but I would argue that doing these things has some near-term benefits for you and for me as well, because doing these things really makes it a lot easier for you to find and to use your digital files. By organizing them, naming them, putting metadata with them, it sure makes it a lot easier for me to find stuff. So as I'm searching for pictures especially, you know, now that I'm putting, you know, names and locations and dates and times on my collection of pictures, it makes it a heck of a lot easier for me to find stuff when I want to. And so all of these things have some things that can have a lot of benefit for you today. If you choose to put stuff up on the internet and share some of your images and do some of those other things, it's going to make it easier for other people to discover your stuff as well. I showed you in the last lecture how you can search for some of my ancestors' names and see, you know, some historically and family significant pictures up there on the internet now, because I've chosen to share them, and it makes it easier for my relatives researching the same families to find the pictures and to find me and to hook up. So this stuff can help you today. But, you know, for the long term, from an archiving perspective, doing all this stuff will help ensure that your digital files are going to be available and useful to family members and future generations of genealogists for many years to come. And that's really the important thing here, I believe. I know most of you in this room, and I know how hard you work and how much time you spent at this hobby, and you don't want this to end when we're not around anymore. You want this stuff to live on and to be available and useful to other people, and these are the things that you can do to help make that happen. You don't want to have your digital stuff be the equivalent of somebody taking all your files and throwing them in a dumpster. You know, think how tragic that would be if all the stuff that we've done just disappeared. You know, archiving it and making people aware of what we have and where it is can help make sure that these things live a lot longer than perhaps we're going to. Bear in mind, there's no one way to do this. I've cultivated a lot of stuff from a lot of different sources, and so don't think that you have to do it Tony's way. Just adopt what works for you and you know, fit it into your style of working with your technology and your style of doing your research, because the only thing you can do wrong is to do nothing at all. Don't just let the stuff sit in floppy disk in a corner of the closet someplace. Keep it current, keep it available. And so, you know, I like to think that if we do this, you know, you'll get a message from the future sometime saying, thank you for doing all that. So, and I thank you for sitting through kind of a technical presentation, and so I'll be happy to try to answer any questions that I can.
I have a question, Tony. On the backup services like Carbonite and Backblaze and those which I have not yet used, you use one of those services?
Yeah.
My question is, can you decide which things you want to be backed up? Like, I mean, to pay for online storage for all this junk I have on my laptop, I realize I should be culling that. I mean, and this isn't my genealogy stuff, you know, this is all the other stuff. Can you, like, move things around and say, I want you to keep back up this file, or this, you know, this group of files, but don't mess with the stuff over here?
I believe that you can, but in all the services, at least the two big ones that I'm aware of, Carbonite and Mosey, or Carbonite and Backblaze, I don't believe they have any storage limits whatsoever. So there's really no purpose in doing that, because they will back up everything much easier than you picking and choosing. But I believe you do have the ability to go in and say, you know, I only want to back up this directory or this groups of files. But again, there's really no point to it, because all you're getting is just the aggravation of having to go through and make the decisions.
Okay. I was just thinking that it would cost more to back up stuff that was pretty irrelevant.
No.
Of course, if it's that irrelevant, I should delete it.
Well, that too, but you never know. But yeah, I don't believe that they have any caps on how much they're going to charge you for exceeding a certain amount of data.
Oh, okay.
The way that they regulate that a little bit is they will say, we'll back up like your primary disk drive, but if you have an external drive that you want to back up, they'll charge you for that one. They do games like that, but I don't think there's any caps on the file sizes that I'm aware of.
Oh, okay. I'll have to relook at them. I have an external drive, and I use Time Machine on the Mac. Of course, it sits like a foot away from my
Right.
Laptop, so obviously if it the house burns down, it all goes away.
The thing,
I did use, or I do use, I have a Dropbox subscription. I pay, you know, for the extra storage, and I have all of my genealogy files on Dropbox, but I haven't really put any of the other stuff out there.
yeah, well, then you do have an effective off-site strategy.
For the genealogy stuff.
Yeah. That's the important stuff, right?
Well, yeah. most of it.
It's all important if you lose it. Of the backup services, the one that if I were picking one today, I'd look real strongly at Backblaze, because they do allow you to back up an external drive in addition to your primary one. And Carbonite, at least last time I checked, that was an extra cost. So if you're looking to get one right now, I'd start with them and see. They seem to be pretty good. Any other questions or comments? All right. Thank you all very much, and we'll see you next January, next year.
Yeah.
We'll be talking about security, which is still a work in progress, but I'm finding lots of material there and lots of reasons to be a little bit paranoid. So we'll talk about many aspects of things that you might want to consider to keep your personal lives and your data secure. So with that, thanks for showing up, and we'll see you hopefully at the awards ceremony a week from Saturday or here next
If you
January.
haven't signed up, you have, till midnight. When I turn it off online.
Yeah.
This has been a presentation of the Dallas Genealogical Society. If you're already a member, thank you. Your membership dues are supporting this and other society activities. If you're not yet a member, I hope you consider joining. You can become a member for as little as $35 a year, and you can join by going to our website, dallasgenealogy.org, and clicking on the membership tab.